There is a moment that happens to almost every adult, and it usually happens quietly, with no big fight and no dramatic scene. It is the moment you stop trying to make your own family understand who you actually are now. Not your friends, not your coworkers, not strangers online, but the people who knew you as a kid. Psychologists have a name for this shift, and the man who studied it the deepest was Carl Jung. He called the process individuation, which just means becoming fully yourself instead of playing the role your family gave you years ago. In this video, you're going to learn why this moment feels so painful, why your family specifically struggles to see the new you, and exactly how real emotional independence looks in real life. We'll break it into 4 simple parts. Why family misunderstanding hurts more than any other kind. The 2 hidden reasons your relatives can't update their picture of you. The difference between healthy distance and just running away. And the exact turning point where the pain finally stops. Let's start with something that sounds strange at first. Strangers can misunderstand you all day and it barely bothers you. But when your own mother or brother misunderstands you, it can ruin your whole week. Here's why that happens. Your family members were there for your childhood. They remember you falling down, failing tests, crying over small things, being scared of the dark. Because they hold all that old memory, they feel like they have a kind of authority over who you really are. So when you show up different, calmer, more confident, more sure of your own choices, part of them is comparing you to the kid they remember, not the adult standing in front of them. Think about it this way. A stranger's opinion has almost no weight behind it because they never knew any other version of you. But a family member's opinion feels like it's backed by decades of evidence, even when that evidence is completely outdated. This creates a strange trap. The people who know your history the best are often the worst at recognizing your growth. And because they knew you before you changed, a part of you keeps hoping that if they finally understand the new you, it will somehow prove the change is real and allowed. That hope is exhausting because you end up explaining your life over and over, hoping for a blessing that may never come. The turning point happens the day you stop needing that blessing to feel like your own life is valid. Now let's get into the first hidden reason your family struggles to see you clearly, and it's something psychologists call the persona. Your persona is basically the role you were given early on inside your family system. Maybe you were the responsible one, or the peacemaker, or the difficult one, or the one who always needs help. These labels get set early, sometimes before you were even old enough to choose them for yourself. The problem is, you can completely change your job, your city, your beliefs, even your personality, and your family can still keep reacting to that old label instead of the real you standing in the room. Picture a woman who spent her 20s as the family disaster, always broke, always in trouble. By her 30s, she had a stable job, savings, and a calm daily routine. But every holiday dinner, her parents still asked if she needed money and still treated her opinions as less serious than her siblings. She wasn't imagining it. She was living proof of Jung's persona trap, where the old role gets replayed no matter what evidence says otherwise. It didn't matter how many pay stubs she could have shown them, or how calmly she carried herself at dinner. The label had been set so early that new facts simply bounced off it, year after year, no matter how much she had actually changed. The second hidden reason is even more surprising, and it's called the shadow. Sometimes your family doesn't resist your change because it's bad. They resist it because it shows them something about themselves they never dealt with. If you become more confident, more direct, or more willing to say no, and that makes a parent or sibling uncomfortable, it might be because they never gave themselves permission to do the same thing. Your growth accidentally becomes a mirror, and mirrors are uncomfortable when you don't like what you see. This is why families sometimes attack the very changes that are objectively healthy, like getting sober, leaving a harmful relationship, or simply refusing to be the emotional caretaker anymore. It isn't always because the change is wrong. Often, it's because the change exposes something the rest of the family quietly avoided facing. Now, let's talk about the difference between real emotional independence and just cutting people off, because these get confused constantly. A researcher named Murray Bowen studied families for decades and came up with an idea called differentiation, which simply means staying connected to people you love while still being able to think and choose for yourself, even when things get tense. A large review of research from 2022 found that people with higher differentiation tend to have better mental health and steadier relationships overall. The opposite of differentiation is something called fusion, where your mood and identity get completely tangled up with your family's emotions. If your mom is upset, you're upset. If your brother disapproves, you instantly doubt yourself. That's fusion, and it keeps you emotionally stuck as an adult, even if you moved 5 states away. There's also something called triangulation, where instead of dealing with you directly, family members talk about you through someone else, a cousin, an aunt, a sibling, so the tension never actually gets resolved, just passed around the room. And there's emotional cutoff, which looks like the opposite of fusion but is actually just fusion wearing a different mask. This is when someone disappears completely, goes silent for years, or blocks everyone, thinking that distance alone will heal the pain. But research and clinical experience both suggest that cutoff rarely brings peace because the unresolved feelings just sit there quietly instead of actually getting worked through. Real emotional independence is not about ghosting your entire family in a dramatic exit. It's about lowering the amount of explaining you do, setting clearer boundaries, reacting less to old triggers, and being okay even when relatives still don't fully get it. Here's a simple way to tell the difference. If you're calm but distant, that's healthy separation. If you're angry, plotting, or obsessively telling the story of your escape to anyone who will listen, that's more likely unresolved fusion wearing a costume of independence. Before we go further, it helps to know that this isn't just a teenage problem that ends the day you move out of the house. Research on what's called emerging adulthood shows that becoming your own person keeps developing well into your 20s and often keeps unfolding beyond that too. This is even more true today because education takes longer, houses cost more, and a lot of the old markers of adulthood, a stable job, a home, a family of your own, arrive much later than they used to for previous generations. That means plenty of 30-year-olds are still working through the exact same family tension a teenager faces, just with higher stakes and more history behind it. Studies on parenting styles also show something important here. When parents are overly controlling, guilt-driven, or unwilling to let their adult children make their own choices, it tends to predict worse outcomes for confidence, identity, and overall mental well-being. So if you've spent years quietly over-explaining yourself to a parent or sibling, that isn't a sign of weakness on your part. It's often a completely normal response to years of the family reacting badly whenever you were different. Now here's where it gets deeper, because family resistance isn't only about persona and shadow, it's also about something psychologists call homeostasis. Every family, like every system, wants to stay predictable. If your old role was to keep the peace, then every time you speak up now, the system experiences it as a threat, even if what you're saying is completely reasonable. If your old role was managing everyone's emotions, then every boundary you set can feel to them like you're abandoning your job. This is one of the biggest reasons explaining yourself never seems to work. You think you're giving them new information, but part of the family may actually be trying to pull you back into the old arrangement that used to keep things running smoothly for them. There's also a quieter layer to this whole story, and it's grief. Most people don't just want to be understood. They want a specific moment where a parent finally says, "I see who you've become, and I'm proud of you." For a lot of people, that exact moment never arrives. And here's the important part. Emotional independence doesn't mean you stop wishing for that moment. It means you stop needing it to happen before you're allowed to feel okay about your own life. This grief is real, and it's worth naming clearly, because a lot of people mistake it for simple frustration when it's actually closer to mourning. You're not just annoyed that your dad doesn't get your career change. You're grieving a version of your dad who fully sees you, respects your choices, and says so out loud, a version who may never show up. That's a real loss, even though nobody died, and it deserves to be treated like one instead of brushed aside as you being too sensitive. Here's an important nuance, too. The fact that your family struggles to understand you doesn't automatically mean they're cruel or acting in bad faith. Sometimes a parent genuinely can't update their picture of you because doing so would force them to question decisions they made decades ago. Sometimes a sibling resists because the whole family's balance depended on everyone staying exactly in their assigned spot. Some relatives even read a simple boundary as a moral accusation because in their mind, stepping back from a role means rejecting them personally. None of this makes the pain smaller, but it does make the picture more human, less like a villain story, and more like a group of people stuck inside old patterns nobody consciously chose. Let's talk about 4 patterns that make this feel even more confusing because if you've lived this, you'll recognize them instantly. The first is role lock, where new evidence about who you are gets ignored in favor of old memories. The second is selective recognition, where your family celebrates the parts of you that fit their old story, like a promotion or a wedding, but completely ignores the parts that challenge it, like your new boundaries or beliefs. The third is moral inversion, where setting a simple boundary gets twisted into you being cruel, cold, or arrogant. The fourth is intermittent approval, where affection only shows up when you slip back into your old, familiar role for a while. If any of these feel familiar, you are not overreacting, and you're not imagining things. These are documented, recognizable patterns, not just personal bad luck. Let's slow down on each one for a second, because seeing them clearly is often the first step toward not falling for them anymore. Role lock shows up when you present clear, current proof of change. A year of sobriety, a promotion, a calm response under pressure, and your family still reacts as if nothing has shifted at all. Selective recognition is sneakier, because it feels like praise on the surface. Your family will happily celebrate your new job or your wedding, since those fit neatly into the story they already tell about you. But mention your new boundaries, your therapy, or your different beliefs, and the conversation quietly changes subject. Moral inversion is the one that stings the most because it flips the entire situation upside down. You calmly say you won't lend money anymore, and somehow you become the selfish one, while the person asking for money remains the victim in the family's eyes. Intermittent approval is the most confusing pattern of all because it trains you like a habit. Affection shows up the moment you slip back into being agreeable, quiet, or available on demand, and it disappears the moment you hold a boundary. Over time, this teaches your nervous system to associate old, smaller versions of yourself with safety, and your new, stronger self with danger, even though the new version of you is the healthier one. Recognizing this pattern by name is often the exact moment people finally stop blaming themselves for feeling exhausted around their own family. It also matters where your family comes from, because culture changes how all of this plays out. In tightly connected or honor-based family cultures, becoming your own person can get read as disrespect or betrayal instead of healthy growth. In immigrant families, the conflict often isn't really about personality. It's tangled up with sacrifice, survival, and fear of losing tradition. In families that moved up economically, a family member's growth can trigger accusations of thinking you're better than everyone else, even when that was never the intention. In families dealing with addiction or chaos, the person who finally gets healthy is sometimes pressured hardest to go back to their old comforting role because their stability threatens to expose problems everyone else was avoiding. None of these backgrounds excuse cruelty, but they do explain why the exact same boundary can land completely differently depending on which family it's spoken into. What stays the same across every culture and every kind of family is the underlying question the system keeps quietly asking: will this person keep playing their old part, or won't they? The details change from family to family, but the underlying question is always the same. Will you keep playing the role that made everyone else comfortable? Let's look at the moments where this whole issue usually explodes into the open, because it rarely stays quiet forever. Common triggers include leaving the family's religion, marrying someone the family doesn't approve of, going to therapy for the first time, getting sober, refusing to take over the family business, choosing not to have kids, or simply setting a money boundary after years of lending or giving. Each of these moments forces the family to face a version of you they didn't plan for. And in almost every case, what looks like an argument about the specific issue, the partner, the money, the religion, is really an argument about whether the old arrangement still holds. If the old arrangement was, you always say yes, then any new no gets treated like a betrayal, even when it's said calmly and respectfully. If the old arrangement was you manage everyone's feelings, then stepping back from that role can feel, to the rest of the family, like you've abandoned a duty nobody ever agreed to give you in the first place. This is exactly why the same conversation can repeat for years without ever resolving anything. You keep offering better explanations, thinking clearer logic will finally get through. But the resistance was never really about logic. It was about protecting a structure that depended on you staying the same. Once you understand that, the constant urge to explain yourself starts to make a lot more sense, and so does the relief that comes when you finally stop. It's worth being honest about the research here too, because it backs up what a lot of people feel but can't quite explain. Studies on lower differentiation consistently link it to higher anxiety, more reactivity, and rockier relationships, while better differentiation links to steadier coping and healthier closeness with others. That doesn't mean the emotionally independent version of you stops caring what family thinks. It just means their opinion stops running the show. You can still feel hurt when a relative misses the point. You can still want a warmer relationship than the one you have. What changes is where the final authority over your own life sits, and it sits with you, not with a group vote from people who knew you 20 years ago. So how do you actually get to that turning point where the pain fades? It rarely comes from one big confrontation or one perfect conversation that finally makes them understand. It usually comes slowly, through less explaining, steadier boundaries, and simply repeating your new normal often enough that Eventually, some relatives adjust just because they've seen it enough times. Some relatives never adjust at all, and that has to be okay too. The final and most important shift is this. Your identity stops being something you need family approval to confirm. You start feeling real, not because they finally saw you clearly, but because you became solid enough on your own that their confusion no longer decides who you are. That single shift is what separates a person stuck in an endless loop of explaining themselves from a person who has genuinely grown up. If any part of this hit close to home, you're clearly someone who thinks seriously about your own relationships, and that curiosity is exactly why you're going to want to watch the next video. In it, we go deeper into the specific phrase families use without even realizing it, the one sentence that keeps grown adults trapped in childhood roles for years. Click that video now, because once you can hear that sentence for what it really is, you will never miss it again. And once you can hear it, you'll finally understand why so many conversations with your own family have felt stuck in the exact same loop for years.